Martin Bergmann, controversial Anglican minister, 1959 to 1998, from the CCRU Writings. The often viciously partisan positions his extreme views have invoked meant that Bergmann was always surrounded by a fog of often ill-founded rumors, a situation exacerbated by his refusal to communicate with the media. Like one of his mentors, the Danish religious philosopher Kierkegaard, Bergmann professed a deep hatred of the press, a contempt extending beyond mere refusal to cooperate into occasional examples of outright violence. One notorious incident last year, in which a photographer threatened a legal case for assault, was ultimately settled out of court. The dark Nordic prince arrived in England under a cloud a decade ago, hounded out of his native Norway for leading a rogue Protestant sect whose practices and beliefs, according to one Norwegian churchman at the time, were unspeakable and wholly unacceptable. Only the C of E would welcome you with a CV like that, a senior Church of England official remarked recently. Some say that Bergmann cynically and wantonly exploited the ailing Church of England's renowned tolerance to a parodic degree, using church protection to disseminate beliefs in every way contrary to established Christian doctrine. Fond of quoting Kierkegaard's dictum, "Christianity is what Christ came to abolish," Bergmann developed what he called an anti-Christian Gnostic Christianity. He characterized established Christianity as a cult of Paul and decried church buildings as prisons for God. Drawing upon Gnosticism, he argued that the creator entity, the Judaic Christian God, was a blind idiot God suffering from autism. All creation, and organic life in particular, were to be regarded as foul excrescences we must seek to annul or to escape. But it was his persistent vilifications of the Roman Catholic Church that proved the greatest source of embarrassment to the Church of England hierarchy, whose declining congregations are one factor impelling an increasingly strong ecumenical drive towards convergence with Rome. The vociferousness of his anti-Catholicism was taken by some to be indicative of failing mental health. He was totally gone, one former friend said yesterday. Bergmann, however, claimed that the only rational view of the Roman Catholic Church was that it was a monstrous blasphemy of transcendent evil, incomparably more corrupt than the mafia, if indeed it can be separated from organized crime, which of course it cannot. His views, he said, were backed up by hard sociological data, which even they can't suppress now, concerning the apparently endemic problem of institutionalized child abuse amongst Catholic clergy. But Bergmann alienated any of the few supporters he had even within Protestantism by adding that any religion that is serious about worshiping the Father God will always be about child abuse. The only difference between the religion of the Paulites and that of the Abrahamites is that, in the Paulites' case, child torture spills over into child murder. Despite tying and binding Isaac, the Jewish God ultimately spares Abraham's son, but the Paulite God actually kills his own son. Presenting a Spinozist immanent critique of Calvin, Bergmann argued that the Calvinists' biggest mistake was that they were insufficiently fatalistic. Evidently, fatalism and morality do not mix. They confuse an ethical and transcendental injunction, "If you eat the apple, you will be ill," with a moral command, "Do not eat the apple." The specific and unique contribution that Protestantism had to make had been systematically distorted into a dismal work cult, Bergmann argued, by a set of state-loving, self-serving money grubbers. Bergmann's well-known detestation of consumer culture was based around an adherence to what he called the category of the sufficient, which had been annihilated by capitalism, insisting you gorge yourself on more and more things you don't want. Bergmann argued that asceticism and self-denial are not moral positions, but very specific programs for the systematic dismantling of secular identity, ways of opening up the body to utter nothingness, which is the reality of the true God. But even Bergmann's purported expertise here had a bizarre twist, since his technique as an exorcist was supposedly based on cooperating with demons in an attempt to free them from mammal meat. There are those who claim that Bergmann had never abandoned the harsh and pitiless pantheon of dark gods from his ancient Norse heritage, but friends suggest that the rot really set in when he began to take seriously the works of the late science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. Dick's sanity was questionable at the end, the Reverend Colin Wemmick, an erstwhile associate of Bergmann's, points out, but Martin had become convinced that Dick's Gnostic-influenced conviction that the Roman Empire had not ended was a vindication of his own views of unbroken continuity of Roman power. According to his opponents, the discovery of Bergmann's body, masked and trussed with various kinds of harnesses, makes a mockery of his theories of anti-sexuality, which argued that sexuality was a secular hell people voluntarily enter, a meat prison for the body. Others claim that the scene of Bergmann's death was obviously faked by his enemies, of which he had many. Yet the most intriguing suggestion comes from those closest to Bergmann, who indignantly insist that, far from being some secret sexual perversion, the apparatus Bergmann had assembled was part of a regime of systematic anti-sexual practice. He was building a machine to escape the meat. A series of unpublished writings on massage, which reputedly argue that properly religious attitude is always deeply masochistic, and which extol massage as a profoundly religious thinker, apparently confirm this interpretation.